The bus ride started like any other, noisy, crowded, and impatient. But everything changed when a group of teenagers began laughing and hurling insults at an elderly black man quietly sitting near the back. His clothes were simple, his posture slightly hunched, and his silence only fueled their cruelty. Passengers looked away, pretending not to hear. No one stepped in. No one imagined that the man they mocked had once stared down death, led hundreds to freedom, and stood in rooms where history was made. The bus rattled on through the city streets as the jeers grew louder. "Yo, Grandpa, you lose your retirement home?" one of them shouted, high-fiving his friend. Another chimed in, "Bet you don't even know what TikTok is, huh, old man?" The elderly man said nothing. He kept his hands folded on top of a worn leather briefcase, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the window, beyond the bus. Even. The teens laughed harder, mistaking silence for weakness. One of them leaned in closer, mocking his slow breathing, trying to provoke a reaction. Still, he didn't flinch. Then a middle-aged woman from a few rows ahead turned to say something, but stopped. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she didn't want to get involved. Like everyone else on that bus, she looked away. But then the bus driver, an older woman with sharp eyes, glanced at the rearview mirror and furrowed her brow. She recognized him, not from the neighborhood, not from a chance encounter, from a photograph. The kind of photograph you see in museums or history books. And suddenly, everything began to shift. The driver's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Her eyes flicked back to the mirror again, locking on the old man's face. Couldn't be. Could it? She had seen that face, framed in black and white, hanging in the Civil Rights Museum downtown. Back then, he was younger, stronger, with eyes that burned with conviction. A man who had marched through fire hoses, who had been beaten but never broken. She opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe age had just worn someone else down to look like him. Meanwhile, the taunting continued. "You deaf, old man? You scared?" One of the boys laughed, waving his phone, recording. Then the bus hit a red light. The vehicle slowed to a halt, and for the first time, the old man moved. Slowly, deliberately. He reached down, unlatched the buckles on his old leather briefcase, and pulled out something worn, creased, and reverent. A photograph. He held it up in his weathered hands. The boys paused, puzzled. In the photo, a younger version of him standing tall between two legends, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis, arm in arm, eyes fixed forward. The crowd behind them stretched for miles. The laughter stopped. One of the teens took a step back. "Wait, is that?" But before anyone could speak, the light turned green. The bus rumbled forward. Silence now filled the space where mockery had lived just moments before. And the man finally spoke, his voice low, deep, steady. "You think I've never heard worse than your words?" he asked, not in anger, but with the weight of 1,000 battles. "Boys like you, I once marched so you could sit wherever you wanted, and now you spit on that." No one replied. The boys stood frozen, eyes darting between the photo and the man holding it. Their cocky grins had vanished, replaced by a quiet, creeping shame. The man didn't gloat. He didn't even look at them. He returned the photo gently to his briefcase, as if it were something sacred, and clicked it shut with care. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear or weakness, but from memory. The bus moved on, block by block. The driver kept glancing at him in the mirror, her eyes now soft with awe. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, sitting across the aisle, finally broke the silence. "Sir," she said gently, "was that really you? In that picture?" The man turned slowly and met her eyes. He nodded once, not proudly, just honestly. Another voice spoke up, this time an older man sitting near the front. "I remember that march. My father took me there when I was a kid. We were there when they crossed the bridge." The air inside the bus grew heavy, but not with tension anymore, with reverence. One of the teens, the boldest one from before, took a step forward. His phone was now hanging at his side. Forgotten. "I didn't know," he muttered. "I didn't know who you were." The old man looked at him. His eyes weren't angry, but they weren't forgiving just yet either. "That's the thing, son," he said softly. "You don't need to know who someone was to treat them with respect. But if knowing helps you remember, then let it." The boy swallowed hard. His friends were silent. Outside the bus, the city rolled by. Same streets, same noise, but inside something had changed. And then, just before his stop, the old man reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small folded pamphlet and handed it to the teen. It was old, faded, but at the top were words printed in bold, black type, "Know your history or be doomed to repeat it." He stepped off the bus without another word. The doors hissed shut behind him, and the bus pulled away, leaving the old man standing on the sidewalk with his briefcase in hand. He didn't look back. He adjusted his coat collar against the wind and started walking, each step steady, measured. The city had changed. The buildings were taller, the people moved faster, but the weight on his shoulders hadn't lessened. He'd carried it for decades. Behind him, on the bus, the silence still lingered like smoke. The teen holding the pamphlet sat down slowly. He stared at the cover, fingers running over the worn edges. "Know your history, or be doomed to repeat it." His friends were unusually quiet. One of them glanced at the pamphlet and muttered, "We were really that stupid, huh?" Another nodded. "Worse, we were cruel." The driver spoke up from her seat, without turning her head. "You kids just had the honor of sharing a ride with Mr. Elijah Brooks. He marched in Selma. He stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And he spent 30 years teaching history before people stopped listening." The name landed like thunder. One of the boys looked up. "Wait, Elijah Brooks? The civil rights guy they named the school after?" The driver gave a small, sharp nod. "That's him. Except they closed that school last year. Said it didn't get enough funding anymore." The teens fell silent again. But now it wasn't guilt, it was something deeper. A sense of loss. Of something they should have known but didn't. Something they mocked without understanding. Back on the street, Elijah Brooks continued walking. He wasn't headed home, not yet. He was going somewhere important. In his pocket was a folded letter, its corners frayed from handling. At the top, "Invitation to the Jubilee Anniversary of the Voting Rights Act." Below, in handwritten ink, "We would be honored if you would speak, Mr. Brooks." As he approached the old courthouse steps, now transformed into a memorial plaza, he stopped for a moment. He looked up at the American flag, waving in the wind, and exhaled a breath that had been held for 60 years. His past was never really behind him. It was etched into every brick he passed. And now, somehow, it was catching up again. A few days later, the teens stood outside a community center. Awkward, quiet, and dressed in shirts their mothers had insisted they iron. They shuffled in, unsure of what to expect. The flyer had said, "Jubilee Anniversary, honoring civil rights pioneers." They had almost ignored it. almost. But something about that old man, Mr. Elijah Brooks, had stayed with them. The way he didn't fight back. The way he carried himself. The weight of history wrapped in silence. Inside, the room was modest but full. Elderly men and women filled the front rows, wearing pins and ribbons, some with canes, others with oxygen tanks, but all standing proud. Photographs of protests, marches, and victories lined the walls. When Elijah Brooks took the stage, he didn't use a microphone. He didn't need to. "I've walked through fire and fear," he said, "but I've also walked through hope. And it's hope that brought us here today, not anger, not revenge." He paused, then looked straight at the back of the room, where the teens stood huddled near the exit. "We can't choose the time we're born in, but we can choose who we become. Every generation gets that choice." The teens exchanged glances. No one smiled. No one laughed. They just listened. After the event, they waited in line, not to take selfies, not to show off, but to shake his hand. When it was their turn, the boldest among them stepped forward. "We were wrong," he said simply. "And I'm sorry." Elijah looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he nodded and reached into his coat pocket again. This time it wasn't a photo or a pamphlet. It was a book, worn, underlined, filled with notes. "The Souls of Black Folk" by W.E.B. Du Bois. He handed it to the teen. "Start here," Elijah said. "Then read more. Then do more." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into a small crowd of elders who greeted him like family. The teens stood there for a moment, clutching the book. They didn't know it yet, but something had shifted in them. Not everything would change overnight. They would still mess up, still stumble. But they had seen a living bridge to the past. And now they carried a piece of it into the future.